Story 1. Everyone should read 1984 by George Orwell. It is not that enjoyable, but it is very important. Story 2. Sphere by Michael Crichton. Much better than the movie. Story 3. East of Eden and Pretty Much Everything by John Steinbeck. Story 4. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is one of the most misunderstood books of all time. It is a short novella and a quick read. Story 5. Hard to pick just one. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Story 6. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It is an incredible insight into how society can shake the good out of you until all you feel is hate and contempt. Story 7. Sapiens. A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. It completely rewires how you see humanity from the cognitive revolution to modern societies. Every chapter feels like unlocking a cheat code to understanding why we live, think, and behave the way we do. It is insightful, humbling, and impossible to forget once you have read it. Story 8. Home and a Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. Story 9. Voltaire's Candide. I was pretty much suicidal when I read it after my wife's death. It put many things back into perspective and helped me regain my bearings. Story 10. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig is one of those books that hits you at the right time, is comforting and thought-provoking, and makes you reflect on regrets and choices without feeling preachy. I have recommended it to many people, and most of them ended up loving it. Story 11. Descent into Darkness. All Quiet on the Western Front. Story 12. Keep the Aspidistra Flying by George Orwell. Such a great time capsule of a story. If you're from a poverty-stricken background like me, there are many themes to relate to. Story 13. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. The Odyssey by Homer. The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. Dante's Inferno by Dante Alighieri. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. 1984 by George Orwell. The Bible, particularly the Gospels. Story 14. Any Book by Robert Service. His biographies of Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin are great. Story 15. I have yet to see it mentioned, so I will throw it in. The Lord of the Rings. I think many of the books mentioned in this thread would never have been written if not for John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. Story 16. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It is simple, short, and somehow manages to stick with you for life. Story 17. Jim Henson. The Works, 1993, by Christopher Finch. This book is a treasure trove if you are a Muppet fan like me. Story 18. Salt. A World History by Mark Kurlansky. Fascinating book about salt, which is far more important historically than I ever knew. Story 19. Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. The Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Story 20. The Star Wars Heir to the Empire trilogy by Timothy Zahn. Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry. Story 21. Sex and Death to the Age 14 and Swimming to Cambodia by Spalding Gray. Story 22. The Magus by John Fowles. Not an important book, but a very enjoyable one. Story 23. The audiobook for Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins is a very different experience than the book. Goggins hired a professional narrator to perform the reading. He sits in the sound booth with the narrator, and at the end of each chapter they discuss it. Goggins expands on details and provides additional insight, followed by questions and answers with the narrator. You get nearly twice the content, and it feels more like a podcast than a traditional audiobook. The actual material of the book is fascinating. Goggins holds the record for completing the most Hell Weeks across various branches of the armed services. He achieved this by using mental techniques that drill sergeants could not break. It is an incredible story about how resilience is developed. Story 24. The Hawkline Monster. A Western Gothic by Richard Brautigan. Story 25. The Name of the Wind and the Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. Story 26. The Count of Monte Cristo is a timeless classic for a reason. It is an exciting and satisfying read. Story 27. A Song of Ice and Fire is a book series by George R. Martin. I know it is not finished, but that does not mean what we already have is not fucking incredible. Story 28. I am more the type of person interested in nonfiction books that will teach me something. One fiction book that kept me most glued to the pages was Stephen King's The Stand. The television miniseries was not nearly as good, but the book had me sneaking time away just to read a few more pages. Story 29. The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. I am almost finished. It is well worth reading and is somewhat shocking at times, but I would definitely recommend it if you have not read it. Story 30. Catch-22 is so funny, brilliant, and terrible. I would also recommend The Graveyard Book to my teenage self. Story 31. Ken Follett's Century and Kingsbridge series answer many questions about how we moved from the past to the present. Story 32. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. How to Spot a Fascist by Robert Paxton. Story 33. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Simple, short, but it sticks with you and makes you rethink life's direction. Story 34. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is simple, but the way it speaks about dreams, purpose, and life's journey sticks with you long after reading. Story 35. For Beginners. Harry Potter series. For introverts. Quiet by Susan Cain. For everyone. Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. Story 36. Blind Sight by Peter Watts. Game of Thrones series. Carrion Comfort by Dan Simmons. Story 37. Alone and Orphaned on the Ocean. Based on a true story. A great book by Richard Logan. Story 38. The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by and Fadiman. Story 39. The Hobbit. Also, if you are a Star Wars fan, the Darth Bane trilogy is excellent. Story 40. Homicide. A Year in the Life on the Killing Streets by David Simon. This was the book that kicked off the television show. David Simon was a Baltimore Sun reporter. He wrote several books in which he spent a year shadowing people. The Corner was another of his. For Homicide, he shadowed the homicide department for a year. Some cases and characters from the book appear in the show. For Crimes Against Women, consult the Sex Crimes section of the Crime Classification Manual or the Sex Crimes book that John Douglas co-wrote. These works were used to train law enforcement and were written by a pioneer of criminal profiling. All his books about cases are very interesting. This book may help you if you find yourself in that situation. Knowing the different kinds of assailants, why they act, and what can keep you alive is useful information. None of us are profilers, but some information to pair with your gut instinct is always helpful. It also helped me survive an attempted attack against me. Story 41. Animal Vegetable Miracle. Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates. The Communist Manifesto. The Omnivore's Dilemma. The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. Cleopatra. Story 42. Ham on Rye by Charles Bukowski. I have read many of his works, and this is one of my favorites. Story 43. Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. The book's critique of religion gave me personal revelations, and its philosophical ideas are inspiring. I think about them often. Story 44. The Painted Man, also known as The Warded Man by Peter V. Brett. A fantastic fantasy novel. I can't recommend any philosophy or life books. I have always gotten my material from YouTube videos, including the teachings of Marcus Aurelius and Miyamoto Musashi. Their works are profound, but I have never sat down to read their collected works or books. Story 45. The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell. Once upon a time, in a land that was called Britain, these things happened. Bishop Sansom, whom God must bless above all the saints living and dead, says these memories should be cast into the bottomless pit with all the other filth of fallen mankind. For these are the tales of the last days before the great darkness descended on the light of our Lord Jesus Christ. These are the tales of the land we call Logar, which means the lost lands, the country that was once ours but which our enemies now call England. These are the tales of Arthur, the warlord, the king that never was, the enemy of God, and May the living Christ and Bishop Sansom forgive me, the best man I ever knew. How I have wept for Arthur. It is cold today. The hills are deathly pale and the clouds dark. We shall have snow before nightfall, but Sansom will surely refuse us the blessing of a fire. It is good, the saint says, to mortify the flesh. I am old now, but Sansom, may God grant him many years yet, is older still, so I cannot use my age as an argument to unlock the wood store. Sansom will just say that our suffering is an offering to God who suffered more than all of us. And so we 6 brethren shall shiver in our half-sleep, and tomorrow the well will be frozen. And brother Myelgwyn will have to climb down the chain and hammer the ice with a stone before we can drink. Yet cold is not the worst affliction of our winter, but rather that the icy paths will stop Igraine visiting the monastery. Igraine is our queen, married to King Brochful. She is dark and slender, very young, and has a quickness that is like the sun's warmth on a winter's day. She comes here to pray. Story 46. The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. Especially for women. Story 47. Prisons We Choose to Live Inside by Doris Lessing. It is only about 90 pages, but it will tell you everything you need to know about human beings. Story 48. Everything is Trying to Kill Everyone. It is a dozen or so essays that are equal parts cutting-edge science for the time, dystopian nightmare fuel, and a college dude dick and fart joke book. Depending on the Venn diagram of your humor and interests, it might be one of the funniest yet existentially terrifying books you will ever read. Story 49. Panagiotis Cornelis, Power and Decision and His History of Enlightenment Thought. Witold Gombrowicz. Ferdidirk. I cannot put a finger on it, but it helped me when I was lost finishing school. Story 50. Cannot Hurt Me by David Goggins is a powerful book about overcoming adversity. I find myself rereading parts of it when I need motivation. Story 51. Daisy Jones and the Six. I started reading 30 books this year, and that's the only one I've liked enough to finish. I don't like reading, but my friend recommended it because it is easy to read. It reads like an oral history, with the character's name followed by their lines. It is loosely based on the Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac, and Lindsey Buckingham romance. Daisy is a nepotism baby and a free-spirited singer. She joins Billy's band for a guest appearance, and the vibe is all there. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll make this a fun read. Story 52. The Origins of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. By Julian Jaynes. Subreddit, Julian Jaynes. Story 53. New Teeth by Simon Rich is a collection of humorous short stories, and I literally love Simon Rich's work. Story 54. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Night by Elie Wiesel. The Autobiography of Bill Peet. Story 55. If you are interested in auto racing, read Going Faster Mastering the Art of Race Driving by Carl Lopez. Story 56. The 13.5 Lives of Captain Bluebear by Walter Mowers. Story 57. Endurance by Alfred Lansing is the greatest story ever told. Story 58. Peter Brett's The Demon Cycle series is still ongoing but excellent. Story 59. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides is a mind-bending book I recommend to anyone who just wants an easy read. I could not put it down. Story 60. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. A wholly original story that makes you question the reality around you and your place in it. It explores themes of liminality, isolation, and contentment. Story 61. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. A short, easy read about loyalty and harsh reality. Story 62. Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. People should read it to understand the authoritarian mind. It shows how he opposed capitalism and Marxist socialism while trying to impose his own form of socialism. Large estates always lead to destruction and misery. Story 63. Code by Charles Petzold. Everyone these days should understand how computers work. Story 64. Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I would have lived in peace, but my enemies brought me war. Story 65. Masters of Atlantis. It's hilarious and still weirdly relevant. It's by far the funniest book I've ever read. Story 66. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is so well written and filled with great wisdom about humanity. I read it every year before Christmas for inspiration. I find something new to appreciate in Dickens's writing every time I read it. Story 67. The Blue Castle and the Emily of New Moon series by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Story 68. Probably the Art of Being Alone because not everyone is alone. Just kidding. Story 69. I think 1984 and To Kill a Mockingbird should be required reading. Story 70. The science fiction story, The Machine Stops, written in 1909, remains highly relevant today. Story 71. The Third Policeman is an Irish surrealist novel. So much happens that it is hard to explain. Also, The Picture of Dorian Gray and Ulysses are classics. Nonfiction. Propaganda by Edward Bernays and Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord will explain a great deal about the world. Philosophy. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Story 72. American Gods by Neil Gaiman. The End of Mr. Y by Scarlett Thomas. Story 73. The Murderbot Diaries is honestly the most fun read I have had in years. Story 74. I recently read Chip War. It helped me understand modern history. Story 75. Factfulness by Hans Rosling should be a must-read for everyone. The world is not as negative as people believe. Story 76. The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay. Phenomenally well written. I went into it not knowing the plot and couldn't put it down. It made me feel absolutely devastated and enlightened at the same time. I have read thousands of books, and I can't stop thinking about this one even a year later. I cannot recommend it enough. Story 77. I have read the April series by Mackie Chandler 4 times in the last few years. It's a sci-fi series I found on the Kindle Unlimited app. It's about a group of interesting people. Some, like April, are ambitious, smart young adults who live in orbit around Earth on a habitat called Mitsubishi 3. The habitat orbits Earth and houses workers who mine a captured asteroid called the Rock. The story also features a colony on the Moon, which April visits. Fascinating storylines. Story 78. The Demon-Haunted World by Carl Sagan. The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Story 79. The Committee for State Security and the World. Concepts of Physics Volumes 1 and 2 by Professor H.C. Varma. Story 80. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Though some parts are considered pseudoscience by some readers, I found the book made me think deeply about society and our patterns as a whole for a long time. It's more of a psychological revelation to me than a presentation of scientific facts. The same goes for Sophie's World by Jostein Gaarder, which many may not have heard of. I also recommend The Midnight Library by Matt Haig and Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World by Haruki Murakami. Story 81. How the Dead Live by Will Self. Think of it as like Beetlejuice for adults. It is very much in the style of Tim Burton, dark but funny. Be prepared, though. It's a hell of a journey. Story 82. Remarkably bright creatures. An octopus living in an aquarium is very uplifting. Story 83. I really enjoyed the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. They are pretty trippy and perhaps a little dense and vague, but in a good way. Evocative. Story 84. Babel by Rebecca F. Kwong. The best historical fantasy novel I have ever read. By far. Story 85. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig and The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker both changed my life. Story 86. 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation by Ian Stevenson. Story 87. East of Eden. Steinbeck at his best, and that is saying something because he is just damn phenomenal to read. Story 88. The Ministry for the Future is the book that has given me the most hope. It is a science fiction novel set in modern times and focuses on real, practical solutions to climate change and unchecked capitalism. I think everyone should read it, especially those who are discouraged about the future. Story 89. Gone with the Wind. The Joy Luck Club. Memoirs of a Geisha. Story 90. I read The Martian before the movie came out. It contains more science and describes the drive across Mars in greater detail. Great read. Story 91. Breath by James Nestor. Most people have an unconscious relationship with their breath. This book was an eye-opener. It explains the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of breathing. The author put himself through several experiments, such as taping his mouth for 2 weeks, to document the physiological changes that occurred. Practical breathing techniques are introduced, and interesting case studies are examined. I originally listened to the audiobook but eventually bought the book because I highlighted many passages for my personal reference. Highly recommended. Story 92. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. Tai-Pan by James Clavell. Story 93. Steinbeck's East of Eden, probably for the general public. Anything and Everything by Terry Pratchett for people interested in how the world works. Catch-22 for people who already understand how the world works or who work in corporate jobs. Story 94. Be Here Now by Ram Dass. I gave away almost every copy I ever had, but I now keep one of the original printings I found in a secondhand bookstore. It is a touchstone of my youth and spiritual awakening. Story 95. The Long Way to a Small, Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Some of the best science fiction I have ever read. It has a Star Trek-like feel, but on a blue-collar ship. Story 96. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari is a must-read for everyone. Story 97. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Even if it is only a few hundred pages long, it is light, silly, and a good introduction to philosophy and thinking outside the box. The Satanic Bible by Anton Lavey. Read it as if it were written to troll the reader because it is my go-to recommendation for a coffee table philosophy book if you do not mind looking like an edgelord while reading it. It has good insights that I am confident most people will find agreeable. Story 98. Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. This is rare quality trash writing. Story 99. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson is an excellent book. You will become more fearless and confident after reading it. It contains many real-life stories that explain why not giving a fuck can be liberating. Story 100. This one. I'm gonna have to recalibrate the tolerances on the whole system. I went back to the construction site today, a little sheepishly after the tongue lashings from some people in this thread. I guess I was hitting the sauce a little too hard when I had no doubt that I was, in fact, the maestro. But that was then and this is now, and I guess I'll kick my can down the road until next time. Next time that can clanks and skitters just right in my ears. Oh boy, I like it when that happens. Shut up. Okay. Story 101. I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. Once you have thoroughly gone down the Advaita Vedanta, non-duality, and ancient text rabbit hole, watch Uppaluri Gopala Krishnamurti or Nancy Neithurkut YouTube videos for a severe mind-bending experience on the topic. Story 102. Range, Siddhartha the Fountainhead. The Kite Runner was a masterpiece. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.